action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Andrew Boulton, a senior lecturer on copywriting and creative advertising at the Uni of Lincoln. Andrew has over a decade's experience writing for big brands, tiny brands, and even a man who carved dolphins out of cheese. Despite having little or no grasp of the semicolon, Andrew writes a regular column for The Drum and penned the best-selling book, Copywriting Is. Not content with only one bestseller, Andrew recently ventured into storybook land, creating what we believe is the first children's book about copywriting. Adele Writes an Ad. Andrew says, "My writing ambition is to create a thriller movie script bad enough for Bruce Willis to turn down." Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. Your voice is so silly.
Oh dear, thank you. Well, that comes up in the quickfire, so let's get started. Right, number one, pen or pencil?
Pencil. Poop.
Poop. Copywriting Is, or Adele Writes an Ad?
I couldn't possibly. That's like a Sophie's Choice question, isn't it? No, I refuse.
Oh, okay. Right, no more refusals. Right, Bruce Willis or Nicolas Cage?
Nicolas Cage, every single time. Every single time.
Top of the hill or bottom of the hill? It's a Lincoln one.
But yeah, no, it is a Lincoln one. The top of the hill is lovely, but very, very difficult to get to. The bottom of the hill is gross, but very easy to get to. So I'm going to say top of the hill. If you can survive the climb, as I have done on occasion, it's worth it. Top of the hill.
Okay, three more. Umbongo or Hooblahoo?
Umbongo, only because I know how upset you got trying to Photoshop a can of Umbongo. It was the angriest I've seen you in all the time I've known you. And I felt like you were going to walk away from the whole project purely based on that.
Such an arsehole. Right, two more. Bitten by a giraffe or having 50p stolen by Roy Keane?
Both upsetting. Both really happened to me in my childhood. I think the Roy Keane thing, because he's a prominent media figure, and he's kind of seemed to have haunted my existence since that. But he took 50p off me.
How did that? Tell me more.
It was a junior Reds. I live in Nottingham. It was when Roy Keane played for Nottingham, and it was like a junior Reds thing. So you'd go off and do some training on the sort of the forest training pitches, and afterwards you got to meet the players, and all the players were there, and you get your photos taken with them. And Roy Keane was just sat on a stool, like he was about to do some sort of very aggressive stand-up comedy, and I went over to get my photo with him, and he didn't smile. He was very sort of, Roy Keane-ish, and he had a can of Coke on the floor, and I kicked it over. I was like, shit. And then my mum was like, "Right, you've got to go and give him 50p, to get a new can of Coke." And I didn't question that. I was like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, I will." And I went and give him 50p, and he was like, he just took it, and that was kind of that. And it was only many, many years later I thought, he took 50p off a child to get a can of Coke that I'm sure we hadn't just purchased out of his own wealthy pockets. So it was a weird sort of encounter with, a hero at the time, at least. And yeah, that's kind of, it's never really, I've never really come to terms with how it all unfolded. If I could relive it again, I feel I'd do exactly the same thing and kind of, sign up for the decades of doubt and shame.
Amazing. What a ridiculous story. Right, last one then. My voice or the voice of a cartoon toilet brush?
They're the same thing.
I think that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, that was fun. Let's do it again.
Yeah, well, to start the show, as I hope you know, we like to celebrate the weird and wonderful routes that guests take in their career. And we know from your blog, English Teachers Meet Copywriters, that you feel copywriting too often is something a person stumbles into. Too seldom are young creatives aware of this life at the time when their biggest choices are made. So what was your first ever job, and then how did you stumble into it?
So sort of, the shitty jobs you do when you are in sixth form and you're just trying to make money for your kind of night out and to go and, buy something terrible from Top Man. Our home base was kind of the defining one. Working at home base with just loads of other lads from my sixth form. My only real memory of it is I stole a lot of batteries. I stole, hundreds, I'd say, of batteries, and it felt like that was and I gave them away. I gave them to anyone I know who needed a battery, but it felt like that was me sort of taking a little bit back from the capitalist system.
The Robin Hood of the battery world.
Absolutely. I've probably still got some of those batteries. I don't know how good they'd be sort of 25 years on. So that was kind of my sort of part-time world. Nothing very kind of extraordinary while I was young. And then I went traveling from university, and that's kind of when I'd always loved writing. I'd always really enjoyed it. I'd always thought, I'd written terrible stories, and I'd even written a radio play. I'd written a radio play about a spy, the kind of thing that John le Carre would throw into his bin and set on fire. That was the sort of the level my radio play was at. But I'd written it, and at the time I thought it was brilliant. I'm going to get something on sort of an afternoon play. And I knew that writing was something that I would want to do with my life in some way, but I didn't know or didn't see how writing could be the main thing I did with my life. No one had ever had that conversation with me. No one had ever sort of suggested what the possible routes were, the possible directions. It was very much, if you took English literature, say, at A level, your teacher would be like, well, if you want to go to university and do English literature, then you can go and read, 3 years more worth of books, and you'll probably come out the other end and you'll come back and you'll teach English literature. And it was this sort of weird and sort of very sort of depressing cycle where there was no way to kind of break out of that and actually do anything other than just kind of read and interpret the books that other people had written. They said if you wanted to be a novelist, it was very unlikely that you would succeed in that. And if you wanted to be a journalist, then you could possibly get a job in that, but it would be low paid and miserable. And so you've got this very bleak picture of kind of what the future looked like if you were determined to have writing as kind of, at the center of your life, or the center of your professional life, at least. So anyway, I went traveling. I did a ridiculous degree. I did a sociology degree that I've never used at the time or since, and that isn't a problem with the degree. It just I couldn't have cared less about it. And I think if you're teaching university students now, you don't care about what you signed up to do for 3 years, especially at the moment. If you're paying £27,000 plus for the privilege, don't do it. Get out of it. Don't go to university. Don't do it for the sake of it. Because that's precisely what I did, and it was a waste of time. So I went traveling and I stumbled into some writing jobs, and I did a weird job where I worked for Yellow Pages in Australia. I started off like doing data entry at Yellow Pages. I think it was called Census. And then I got chatting to the people who would write the adverts, and they'd ring up these sort of like these mad Australian farmers who are, out deep in the bush, and they'd say, what do you want it to say in your advert in Yellow Pages? And I got into that, and I wasn't very good at it, but I liked the idea of someone would sort of say, this is what I kind of want to say about my business. This is kind of, what I do really well. This is why I think people should choose us. And I would have to kind of craft that into something that would fit into these sort of tiny little boxes. So that was fun. I thought, okay, this is great. It's not the most creatively fulfilling, but this is me using something finally in a part-time job, using something that I'm actually good at. And I never had that experience. And then I did writing some football reports for a paper in Sydney, and that would be in like English football matches. I'd have to go to the casino in, I think it was Darling Harbour or something Harbour. So go and sit in the casino because I didn't have a telly and I couldn't watch the game. So I'd go and sit in this casino, spend loads of money just kind of sitting there, just drinking and watching a football game, a football match. And then I'd sort of submit my copy like, an hour after it had finished. And this was all obviously the middle of the night because it was English times for English kickoffs. And I'd sort of send it in, and my sub-editors would sort of, shave off about 800 words to get it down to the actual word count. And I'd see myself in the paper with a byline. And it was brilliant. I absolutely sort of loved it. And then I came back to the UK and I thought, well, let's give it a go. Let's see if I can find a kind of a job that involves writing. And completely by accident, completely by chance, I found Egg, the credit card company, which hopefully some of your listeners will remember. But it was this quite, funky, edgy, for a credit card company brand, back in the early 2000s, based in Derby, on Pride Park in Derby. And they were looking for a copywriter. And I saw this advert pop up and I thought, I've never, ever heard that word. I've got no idea what that means. And I thought, well, maybe it's something to do with copyright and trademark and, working with inventors. But no, I read on and it was about writing, and it was about writing marketing material and kind of customer communications. And I kind of cobbled together a portfolio of some stuff I had really worked on. I'd set myself some briefs and did some really, really terrible adverts. I did one that was all about getting rebranding Dairy Lee triangles so that they'd be like an adult cheese board choice. And I did a really awful job of it. And I went in and I got interviewed by a brilliant guy called Julian Panico, who was the head of copy for Egg. And he sort of saw enough and he said, yeah, we'll sort of give you a chance. And I went to work in their internal agency, met one of my sort of best mates there, Claire Blythe, who was the sort of the head of the copy for the Derby branch. And her and Julian taught me loads of stuff, let me have a go at kind of everything. And that was it, completely by accident. The complete chance of opening a particular page on a job search site at a particular moment and sort of someone willing to sort of take a chance on someone with no real sort of background or experience. And that was sort of no turning back from that. And I'd probably been doing it for about a week, 2 weeks. And I thought, this isn't grown up work. This isn't, there were loads of really sort of brilliant mates there and we messed around and it was very silly and you got to think about having ideas and, you could go and have a 2.5 hour lunch at a walkabout because it was creative time. And you can see why the bank sort of failed by our kind of attitude and our diligence. But at the time it was incredible. And I thought, this is it. This is exactly what I want to do. Anything else I'd be doing other than this would be a sham. It would be me kind of pretending to be a grown-up and pretending to kind of fit into this professional adult world. And I just thought that, in that moment, and have continued to think, even now, how lucky I was to kind of arrive at that kind of situation, and how many people must miss out on that. How many people aren't as lucky as I was. And that's kind of always stayed with me. So the blog you mentioned right at the very start about English teachers, let's meet copywriters and introduce those two worlds. I think I've got responsibility as someone who fluked my way into this incredible life that I love and cherish and hopefully I'm good at and doing good work at. I've got responsibility to tell more people about it, and that's kind of what I'm doing through the course at uni. I teach on the creative writing course now as well as the creative advertising course, but it's something that every copywriter could and should be doing. You don't have to kind of have that platform of being a lecturer, being a teacher, to tell a young creative person about this world, this job called copywriting.
And presumably it was quite different going from the writing in casinos in Sydney's, because that was effectively a journalism task of reporting on matches. It wasn't necessarily creative, albeit there's creative ways of reporting, no doubt, but it wasn't really an ideas-based task, was it? So presumably then going into something which was a bit more about using words to hit an objective, or at least creatively, and having ideas at their core, that must have felt quite alien at first.
So I think the way you just described how the match reports should have been is exactly what I was hired and expected to deliver. I wrote my match. I would write a match report on West Brom versus Southampton on a Sunday afternoon, and it'd be like a Norman Mailer piece. It was entirely about me and what I thought, and I don't even think they were terrible. I think they were really, really good, but they were bad match reports. So it was a shock. I think the biggest shock wasn't kind of going from this kind of reporting stuff, because I was faking that. That was never really what I was good at, or what I was ever going to be good at. It was more a question of going into a world where I couldn't just write what I wanted or write what I thought was good. It was this idea of, you just said kind of objectives, writing with a purpose, writing with a different voice. And that's, that is always the hardest thing. You get into copywriting because you love writing. You've got a love of words. You've got a love of creatively expressing your ideas and your imagination through language. And then that's the thing that draws you to copywriting. That's the thing that probably gets you into the industry. And then that's the thing you almost have to very quickly dismantle and abandon and sort of leave behind as you kind of start to work, because it becomes very much not about you. It becomes not about what you like or what you think is good or what you want to do or what you want to say. It's about what would this brand say? What does this audience want to hear? So it's a weird discipline, and it's kind of a weird transition to make from someone who's just got this very pure and very personal love of creative writing into writing for a brand or a business, or trying to sell a fizzy drink or a lawnmower or what have you. But I genuinely feel, as well as being an incredible skill to learn and something that can kind of take you in some really wonderful directions where you will have a very fulfilling and rewarding and sort of surprising career, it makes you a better creative writer as well. And this is what I was sort of saying to our creative writing students. They've all turned up on a creative writing degree, wanting to write their play, wanting to write their novel, wanting to kind of compile a collection of poetry. And I'm there standing in front of them saying, no, you want to go write some adverts for Greggs. You want to sort of do go and do a jingle for a chicken and mushroom slice. And what I'm trying to convince them is, if you get into that world and you can start to experience it and work on these things that take you out of your comfort zone and take you away from the stuff that you're kind of naturally drawn to, it will make you better. It will make you a better craftsperson. It will make you better at formulating ideas. It will make you better at kind of giving voices to your characters. And I fully, wholeheartedly believe that. I feel like I come on these things and I'm such an evangelist for copywriting. And you could very easily listen to this and think I'm going really overboard with it. But I fully believe it. Copywriting in itself is just a very joyous way to spend your life. But it will help you become such a much better, richer, more interesting writer.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about you do teach young people about copywriting, but then equally creative writing. But your creative writing course that's just kicked off, I believe. Do you think that people nowadays are in a better position where they can be made aware of creativity or creative writing in the advertising world versus when you were of that age many years ago?
I think not enough has changed. And I think the creative writing course I teach on has been running for a long time at Lincoln. And it's a brilliant course. It's a very, very popular course. And, they've got some incredible staff on it who have written some really brilliant stuff, and they're amazing teachers. But the reason I have joined the course and I've rewritten one of their modules was because there was no reference to this whole kind of universe of kind of, let's call them commercial writing opportunities. So to be a copywriter in an agency, to be, a content writer, to write for brands, on social media, to write, branded podcast content, if you like. And I started off with my session with these sort of 70 or 80 sort of students yesterday, engaged enough in the world of creative writing to have kind of committed to 3 years of a degree. And I asked them, who's heard of copywriting? Who knows what it is? And 10%, 15% maybe put their hands up. And of those 10 or 15%, they had the very most basic knowledge that this thing kind of existed somewhere in the world, but it's not particularly on their radar. And, this is however many years since I left sixth form and thought about what I was going to do at university. And these are students who are primed, they are kind of heading in that direction. They've chosen creative writing as a focal point for their sort of studies and their future. And they don't know about it, and it's sad and it's depressing. And you add into that the amount of time that agency owners or creative directors will message me and say, we're really looking, we're looking for junior copywriters and we're sort of struggling to find them. Can you recommend anyone? And I get that a lot. Now, art directors, designers, people with kind of that visual communication skill, lots and lots of them. I could give you sort of, 10, 15, 20 brilliant names. But people who are specialist, young, junior, creative specialist writers, it's really hard. It's really hard to kind of think of someone. So I'm trying to indoctrinate. I've gone into this creative writing thing very much with a cult mentality. I'm trying to brainwash, and I'm trying to kind of divert people away from their novels or their poems and kind of turn them into copywriters. We'll see. Come back to me in 2 years and we'll see how successful we've been.
Yeah, okay, I will. There's two things that I want to pick up on that. One is you mentioned quite rightly about English teachers pointing towards journalism and writing novels and maybe more kind of, I suppose, a purer form of writing. Not to suggest that copywriting or creative writing is in any way unpure, although I've read some of your copy. Do you think creative copywriting is just subservient then to that type of literature? And do we perhaps need more English teachers who are copywriters or were once copywriters?
I think there is the traditional mentality that very much puts copywriting as kind of subservient to, let's call it, literature. I think there's a chapter in the book in Copywriting Is where I talk about copywriting is still proper writing, and it absolutely is. And I think you look at the people who went on to kind of write incredible novels, who worked themselves as copywriters. I think Dorothy Sayers was a copywriter. I think it's like did Scott Fitzgerald do some copywriting for a bit? Joseph Heller certainly did. It's the two worlds are not incompatible. They kind of cross over. Benjamin Myers, who wrote the Gallows Pole, which is an incredible book. I've just finished reading, and it's being Shane Meadows is turning it into a sort of a TV thing. He was a copywriter. I read one of his articles about copywriting not long ago. So I don't think those worlds are kind of as incompatible as some people would like you to believe. I think if you could get an English teacher into a college, into a sixth form, who had worked in copywriting, who just knew enough about that world, you could easily do a class or a couple of classes, or even a bit more, on just brilliant adverts. Fantastic adverts that have been written, and start to kind of introduce that side of things at kind of A level. But I think it's this if the traditionalist view of an English literature course is, and I don't know the syllabus, so I might be being very dismissive here, so apologies if that's the case, but if it is just here's some Shakespeare, here's some Thomas Hardy, here's a token piece of contemporary writing, here's a token piece of kind of modern playwriting, here's some poems from World War One, that feels like such a kind of reductive view of what the kind of possibilities are for you as a young person engaged and interested in words. And yeah, there's a huge amount of literature and fiction and poetry we could kind of add into that to freshen it up. But why would you stop there if you've got this whole other kind of world that you could be introducing these young people to, where at the end of that is probably the most viable career for a young writer, in this country at the moment, is going to be in the marketing and advertising and branding and sort of content world. More so than journalism, more so than kind of, publishing your own stuff. And what I've said to the creative writing students is, don't see this as kind of a betrayal of your artistic ideals. Don't see this as you kind of abandoning the dream. Some of those authors I mentioned earlier, they took jobs as copywriters, but they were continually kind of pursuing their own project, their own novel. The difference is that you can go off and be a copywriter and do this job that's paying you money, and helping you become a better writer every single day, instead of going, well, I'm working on my novel, so I'm going to go and work in a coffee shop, or I'm going to go and work as a waiter, or I'm going to go and work in a car wash. The two worlds should just be a lot closer together. And if you're dismissive of advertising, writing for advertising or writing for marketing as a lesser skill, that just proves to me that you've never done it. And I'd even put a question mark about whether you'd know how to do it.
Was that part of the motivation then behind Adele Writes an Ad then, to bring light to the mysterious and confusing job of copywriting?
Absolutely. And I think, me and you have talked about this at the very beginnings of that idea. There are children's books about all sorts of jobs, any job you can think of. Some jobs that sound really, really rubbish and would probably make you miserable if you did them for 40 or 50 years. But in terms of creative jobs, in terms of the world of advertising and marketing, perhaps, but more so, where you can go out and you can make a living based on purely on your creativity, purely on your imagination. It feels like you've got this audience who is very much primed to hear that. Okay, at the moment, all you do is play and think of silly games and have these weird dreams, and the lines between kind of reality and kind of imagination are very, very blurry. for me to say to that audience, you can keep in that state. You can remain in that state when you are much, much older and you've got your own responsibilities, because there's this job, there's this world where you get paid to be imaginative. You get paid to see the world in a slightly strange way. It just felt like a really good fit.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I've had this conversation obviously with you, and for years I feel like I've been wrestling with that problem of how do we expose people to the opportunity and the weird and wonderful creative industry that is advertising and marketing and various other forms of creativity, because it's a huge problem. I don't know if the problem is to do with the syllabuses which are taught at schools. I don't know whether, I mean, there's various ways it manifests itself. Can you tell us a bit more about the book and just unashamedly plug Adele quickly, because I do want to make sure we do that.
I certainly can. Yes. So plug alert. The book is the story of two copywriters. There is Adele. She is 4 years old. Because at the time I wrote it, my daughter Penelope, she was 4. She's now 5. And Adele lives with her mum, whose job is she's a submarine captain. So she goes off to sea and she drives her submarine. But Adele's dad is a copywriter, and he stays at home and he sits in front of his computer and he kind of comes up with ads for the telly. And then one day, Adele's dad, he lands a brief. He lands kind of the big account, and the biggest account in this universe is the Hooblahoo account. So Hooblahoo is the greatest fizzy drink there is. Each can is filled with froth and fizz. It's the strapline. And he's delighted. This is kind of the biggest brief of his career. This is going to make him, this is going to nail him a D&AD pencil or whatever the equivalent of that is in our sort of cartoony world. But then he suddenly crumbles and he freezes and he doesn't know what to do. And his imagination lets him down. The pressure of, having to kind of come up with this concept and coming up with these words, he's hit that kind of, that block. And Adele, who is a girl with a huge imagination, steps in and says, right, grab a pencil, write this down. I'm going to tell you what I think this advert could be. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to put Hooblahoo at the heart of it. And there are wizard monkeys rescuing their grandmas. There are fiendish plates of quiche. There are frog-legged trombones. There are robot sharks with laser eyes. And it's all this very sort of strange and peculiar stuff that could only ever kind of pour out the head of a child. But it's all, coming back to, why is Hooblahoo so great? What's the benefit, as we like to say. And she finishes this ad, and it's this kind of very weird and wonderful ad that only a child could have produced. And her dad's delighted, and they send it off. And, we hope it kind of would have made it to telly, and it would have been a huge success. So it's a story about, those kind of creative moments between a sort of parent and a child, where it's the parent being led, and you have to allow yourself to kind of be led, and you have to sort of say yes to stuff, and you have to resist the urge to correct. You have to resist the urge to kind of guide someone back to the path of reality. You need to go the other way. You need to step off, what you feel like is the logical and rational way to think about the world, and you need to just go along for that kind of creative ride. You've got to kind of step into their imagination, because it's such a kind of an endless and joyful thing, sort of the imagination of a child. So that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to kind of bring those two worlds together. Initially, just for jollies, just for fun. But then it felt like, and it sounds really wanky, and I don't mean it this way, like it has now become like it has a higher purpose. And the higher purpose is, if you're young, if you're full of imagination, I think the worst thing that can happen to you is that kind of gets squeezed out of you, because you run out of places to take it. And you run out of things to do with it. And too many kind of people and institutions will tell you that imagination is not the thing you can kind of build a career on or build like a grown-up life on. And I think that's fucking nonsense. And, whether you end up in copywriting or something else, there are so many things as a grown-up where you can kind of use your imagination. Your imagination becomes your most important asset, and is appreciated and valued, and makes money for you and other people. So if the book does a little bit of that, and it plants the seed that I don't have to give up on with sort of, imaginative whimsy yet, and perhaps I never actually do, because there's value in it. And hopefully if it does that, then I feel like I've achieved my small and smug purpose.
It's amazing. It's brilliant. I love the story, as you know. I think it's overtaken Fantastic Mr. Fox. I love kids' stories. I love silliness, and it's full of silliness. But people listening, if they haven't already, they can go to adelewritesanad.com. And for free, they can listen to the brilliant Jem Higgins narrate the story. So if you imagine my voice at one end of a spectrum and hers at the other, it's it's audio gold.
It's I think just a word on Jem. We knew straight away that Jem was the person we wanted to read it. It was a no-brainer. Her voice is incredible. But even then, you're not sure how it's going to turn out. This was our kind of story and our words and our kind of characters, and you're handing it over to someone else. And I remember listening to the recording Jem sent through, and it's just that mind-blowing moment where you think, this is perfect. Like, how can someone have kind of, brought this to life and kind of filled it with their own essence, but captured everything we were trying to do as well. So I'm not going to praise her any more than that. I think that's probably enough. But
it's great. That is great. It would be wrong not to talk about copywriting as well. And in your explanation there and talking about the significance of allowing your imagination to be led, your number one bestseller copywriting is. Hey, told you I'd get it in.
Yes, thanks.
It's interesting in many ways, but it's interesting partly because it doesn't try or claim to teach people how to write copy, but it will show people what life as a copywriter is like. And one thing again that's so important, and going back to that, allowing your imagination to be led, has manifested itself both in a talk you did for Isolated Talk called Creativity in the Wild, where you walked around a park like a lunatic, and conclude that creatives don't do well in captivity. And there's this idea of wandering, which is a chapter in the book. So is that an exercise that you do with your students? Is that helpful for copywriters in general?
Yeah. I just on a side note, on the Isolated Talk, I thought it would be a brilliant thing to talk about wandering while I was on a wander. And I anticipated none of the many sort of challenges and hazards that will present. The worst one was I had a really brilliant take. I was probably about 15 minutes into sort of the 20-minute talk. And there was a big crow, and the big crow really startled me. I did a little squeal and had to go back to the very beginning and start again. So it was a bad idea, but we kind of got there in the end. The point of it all was that I've always had a problem with desks. I've always had a reputation wherever I've worked where people feel like I can't sit still. If I'm in a meeting, I can't. I'm visibly kind of anxious. I'm twitching. I have to stand up. I have to walk around. I just can't be still because that's not how I think, and that's not really how. I don't want to fit. If you're doing a creative role, I think the worst thing you can do is kind of try and fit your creative skills or your creative approach or your creative process into what is kind of accepted as traditional working methods or traditional working environments or even traditional working postures. You're sat at a desk in an office and you should be there, during the specified times of your hours, and that's the space we've given you to work in. So of course you have to work there. And I've never ever been able to do that. And it's not. It's partly, I suppose, because I'm an overly precious creative and sort of autistic temperament is. But I've been accused of that before. But it's more primal than that. It's a biological thing. The chemistry in my brain just won't allow that. And if I sat at my desk for too long, then my brain would stop even attempting to come up with anything useful. So for years and years and years, I wrestled with it because I thought, well, this makes me weird. This makes me sort of strange, and this makes me kind of unsuited for professional life. Even in a creative agency, I felt like I was kind of a bit of the odd one out. And then you slowly kind of come to terms with it and say, well, no, actually, look, if this is how you arrive at your best stuff, and as long as that best stuff meets the brief and impresses your, the agency owners and the CD, and the client buys it and likes it and it goes off and is effective, it doesn't really matter where you were or how you kind of arrived at it. And none of that stuff should matter. But I just wasn't seeing that kind of attitude reflected in a lot of the kind of the agencies I knew and I worked at. It was an expectation that you would sort of behave in this very sort of conformist sort of way. And another sort of drum that I've ended up kind of beating relentlessly to a point of really, really boring people is that I despise desks. I hate desks. And I feel like, writers feel like they have to be at a desk, this sort of traditional idea of a writer hunched over a typewriter, hunched over a desk. Of course, you have to return to your desk. But I think the desk is the place where it kind of pours out of you. Go away and do something else until you reach that state where you feel like, you desperately need your desk. You desperately need a pen and a piece of paper to just let this stuff kind of gush out of you. But until you reach that stage, go anywhere. And I think there is a relationship between sort of the potency of your imagination and being up and out and walking. I need to be standing up. I need my feet to be kind of moving. I need the sky. I need to be able to kind of look above and see the sky and not those shitty sort of foam tiles and horrible strip lights. And I think the relationship between nature and creativity is something that far cleverer and more creative people than me have always spoken about. But I feel like a lot of the time, copywriters and creatives feel like they don't have permission to do this. They feel like they're being difficult. They feel like they're being, deliberately contrary by wanting to be somewhere else, wanting to go for a walk while they think about what they're going to do. And I see it in the students. If I set the students a brief, they've got a really brilliant studio at Lincoln that they can sit and work in, and they will go and sit at a desk and they'll stay there. And again, there's a place and a time for that, and there's a place for saying we need to be outside, we need to be moving, we need to kind of trying to get our brains into a certain state. And they're so reluctant to do it because they've been brought up in a sort of a teaching environment where you sit still, face to front. And I think there's so much kind of dewiring, deprogramming you need to do to kind of young creative people and very experienced creative people that says, find your own way, find your own state, find your own kind of environment, find your own process, find the best time of day that works for you, find the place in the world that is most inspiring to you. And once you've found that stuff, make use of it. I think sort of habit and routine and sort of, the comfort of being in the same place, looking at the same stuff. It might feel comfortable, it might feel cozy, and it might feel safe, but ultimately, creatively, you don't want any of those things. You don't want to feel comfortable and cozy. You want to feel challenged. You want to feel like your perspective is continually being kind of renewed. And that's what it was all about, essentially. It was just this, give yourself that permission to move. And if you're in a place that totally objects to that and totally refuses, your permission to go out and be creative in the way that will be best for you and ultimately, result in the best work, then that business doesn't understand creativity and it doesn't understand the way creative people work. And, it casts a huge question mark about whether you want to be there or not.
I couldn't agree more with everything you've said, which I don't like to admit.
I was going to say, this has never happened.
I'm going to dub it out anyway. So copywriting does not teach you how to write copy, but it does teach you how to be a copywriter. Is that fair to say?
I think so. There are some incredible books that teach you how to be a copywriter. Our friend Giles Lingwood.
Spelt wrong.
And he supports Arsenal. He's like the anti-Giles. I've never seen you two in a room together, so I reckon you're just two sides of the same twisted coin. But he's written a book called Read Me. If your readers don't know about Read Me, it's fantastic. It's kind of one of the very best books that teach you how to be a writer, teach you sort of the craft of it. I couldn't write that book, and I wouldn't want to try and write that book because I think there are so many sort of guides to copywriting, really brilliant ones that exist already. Mine would have just been another version of the same thing, but bad. So the intention was always to write something that was never a guide to how to be a copywriter. It was almost a window into the life of a copywriter. Vicky Ross described it in an amazing way, described it far better than I did, annoyingly. She said it's my love letter to copywriting, and that's exactly what it is. It's this incredible life that has filled me with kind of so much happiness and so many sort of weird and surprising and unsettling things, and this kind of constantly new and fresh and kind of unexpected way to kind of make a living, and it's exactly that. I've loved it. I've loved it. I've loved every moment of what I've been allowed to do. That I've accidentally bumbled into this world, and kind of it's become such a huge part of my life and a huge part of who I am as a person. So it is a love letter to it, and I'm not saying it's always joyful. It's a profession that comes with a lot of frustrations and a lot of very sort of strange and depressing moments, but fundamentally it's you're getting paid to kind of be peculiar, to be interested, to be curious about the world, and to turn that into something through words that is going to kind of stand out and make a difference.
Awesome. I've got a couple of listener questions for you, mate.
Okay.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. And we have two. We sent one to you to give you time to prep, but I found out just before we pressed record that you hadn't read our email particularly well. I'm going to hit you with that one first. So,
Okay, excellent. I'm going to wing it.
yeah, okay, yeah, good luck. Fellow Call to Action alumni and word man Dave Harland asks, it's a well-known fact that the word rhythms is the longest word in the English language that doesn't contain any vowels. But can you tell me your top 3 favourite words that don't contain any consonants with a detailed explanation why you love each word?
Fuck off, Dave. Right, okay. So there's a lesson in here, isn't there, about reading your emails and sort of, preparing for these things properly. There's also a lesson in, I feel like if I had have read that, I still wouldn't have made any effort to have a proper answer ready for it. So with Halloween coming up, my answer to this is going to be my first one, with no consonants in it, is the word ooh. And that's probably about 7 O's. And I like that because it works lots of different ways. It likes that. It works in a spooky context. Yeah. And it works in that's a nice jacuzzi bath you've just bought, Giles, context. And that's the only 2 contexts it works in. My next one, with no consonants, is the word E, which I feel is the sound you would make if you were going on a mid-speed water slide at a water park. So it's not an intensive water slide, because that's more of a but like a E is kind of water slide noise. And that's it. That's all I'm doing. What a fucking awful question.
Oh,
I'm not Dave Harland's dancing monkey, and he needs to know that.
Oh, wonderful. Right, question 2 then is from a fantastic mutual friend and friend of the show, Sophie Cross.
Sophie Cross.
She asks, if you were living in a hut in the desert on your own, which is probably quite likely, let's be honest, for 100 days with plenty of provisions, what would you write?
What would I write?
Yeah, you've got 100 days on your Todd in a desert.
I'd go back I'd revisit my Cold War spy thriller radio play that I wrote in 2002. And I'd see if I could make it good. I love, I'm a big reader, and I try and read lots of different stuff. And, but I end up coming back to things that just give me the most joy. And that is usually kind of Graham Greene and John le Carré. And like John le Carré in particular, I think the craft of that, of being able to write these sort of very intricate but very sort of compelling sort of spy thrillers with such a unique, the George Smiley character is my literary hero. I think he's such a unique character. It would be my dream to kind of be able to write in that way, in that kind of subject. But I honestly feel like I couldn't do it. I feel like I'd be so bad at it. So what I would use my hut in the desert for, I'd write a play. I love the idea of writing a play. I don't know what it'd be about. It'd be about 2 idiots called Giles, and they spell their names differently, but they're both idiots. And they're standing there waiting for someone to arrive who never arrives. I don't know what it would be about, but that would be my starting point. And then Dave Harland would turn up and he'd ask you a really complicated question that you couldn't answer on the spot, and he'd ruin the whole play. But yeah, a play. I feel like it's one of those things where you kind of grow up as a writer, and you do cast off certain ambitions you had. And it's not a sad thing. It's not a sad thing to have kind of let go of what you once thought was going to be the thing you do and you really wanted to do. You just learn a little bit more about what you're capable of and what you're good at and what you would, what would you be able to spend your time on. But a play is one of those things where even if nothing ever happened with it and no one ever made it and no one ever wanted to see it, I'd feel like I'd just like to do that. I'd like to get it out of my system.
Nice. Good answer. Good answer.
So thanks, Sophie Cross, for asking a proper question that is answerable.
Well, thank you, Sophie. And thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave.
Fuck him.
The final part then of our interview, Andrew, is our full pertinent posers. So number one is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I'm bad at advice, and I'm probably no better at advice as a 40-year-old as I was at a 20-year-old. I think there's a song by the Divine Comedy called A Charmed Life. And I feel like I've very luckily, and not through any sort of hard work or any sort of redeeming features on my part, I've had a charmed life. I've ended up in a place that has brought me a lot of joy, and often I've kind of ended up in sort of happy situations by being an idiot and bumbling into things and not knowing too much about the world I was kind of going into, and just kind of going along with it. So I think it's almost my advice to young me would be wary of advice. There is no kind of clear and definite path to anything, and just because you might have missed a turning that you thought was going to kind of take you to a certain place in your life, it doesn't mean that was the right place to be in, and it doesn't mean that would be your only chance to get there. I suppose I kind of breeze along. I think if that was going to be my approach to anything, and just allowing yourself to kind of be blown along isn't always a bad thing, and it doesn't make you a passive character. It just means you're kind of open to surprises, really.
Cool. Good advice. Ironic advice.
I don't think it was good advice. I don't think it was good advice.
I have to be polite to guests. If it was good advice. It was good advice. Well, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
I think. Can I give a really contrary answer again? I feel like I've answered both of these questions with not really an answer. I would ban.
It wouldn't be you if you didn't.
No, that's fair. I think I would banish the need to banish, and I think there's not always. I know. I'm sorry. You can edit all of this out. I feel like there is too much there is too much proprietorialness perhaps in the creative side of our industry, where certain generations might feel like it was better in their day, and new generations might feel like it's all about it's all about the platform or the media or the kind of the advances that made it in that world. And I'm fine with both of those kind of perspectives, providing you are never, that never means that you're dismissive of the other thing. And I think, I've got a real problem with this kind of, blinkered, let's call it negative nostalgia, if you like, where you constantly look back and think things were so much better in the past, and in the past there was only ever brilliant work being produced and there was no rubbish, and nowadays everything's rubbish and there's no good work. Those things aren't true. There is good work, incredible work, amazing writing, amazing kind of creative ideas coming through all the time. There was incredible creative ideas in the past, but there was bad stuff in the past as well. And in a way, I don't think the industry has changed as much as kind of perhaps we like to think it has, or some people believe it has. But I think if you're looking for something to throw out of it, if you're always looking on the creative side, I'm talking about, if you're always looking to something that you can kind of dismiss or devalue or say doesn't have a right to kind of be a part of kind of what we do or what we've all sort of been doing, I don't know. I think all it does is create division, and it kind of makes people feel bad, and it makes people feel defensive. And when you feel defensive, you end up attacking the thing that's attacking you. And there should be harmony amongst kind of the creative people who worked in kind of marketing and advertising. No matter how old you are or where you did it or the type of work you did, the pressures of it, the challenges of it, the frustrations, that it's not always about the best idea is going to kind of win through. And I just think give people credit for what they are doing and what they've done. Give them your support. Don't just kind of, pile in and say, well, that's fine, but, things were different in my day and my day was better. Just open your eyes to the fact that the world that existed either before or after you were doing this thing has still got a lot of positives to it. It's still got a lot of kind of hope. It's got a lot of people with the right intentions and incredible skills and real commitment, doing the best they can and doing interesting stuff and trying to kind of push boundaries. It doesn't matter if, the mechanics of how to be a creative have changed dramatically, over the last 20, 30, 40 years. That's irrelevant. You've got to think about what the essence of being a creative person in this industry is. And I think just celebrate that. celebrate the good stuff that's happening now, celebrate the good stuff that was happening then.
Good answer. I mean, it started off, I thought you were going to be difficult just for the
No,
sake
no,
of it, but you
no.
actually made a lot of sense.
Okay, so this question, I promise I'll answer properly.
Okay, any books that you would recommend to our listeners? So we will, of course, link to both Copywriting Is and Adele Writes an Ad. Can I assume you would recommend Read Me, because you should?
I would wholeheartedly recommend Read Me. I think it's really fantastic. I'm a big fan of Junior by Thomas Kemeny. I've chatted to him very briefly on LinkedIn, and he's an absolutely lovely man. And he sort of helped us sort of spread the word about copywriting is. But I think Junior is a really fantastic book. It's a beautiful book, but there's so much kind of wisdom in it, and it's a very sort of entertaining read. What else? I mean, I suppose the one thing I'm sort of slipping into kind of contrariness again. So sorry, I'm going to do it anyway. The one thing I would say is, even if copywriting is your passion and it's kind of either where you want to be in the world or where you are right now, and you want to be better and know more, the best thing a copywriter can do is just read. It doesn't have to be a book about the craft of copywriting to make you better at writing. I think whatever you're reading, just make sure you're capturing the stuff that inspires you, capturing the stuff that kind of teaches you something about the art and the craft and the business of writing a really sort of effective sentence, a really compelling sentence, a sentence that sort of stands out and is memorable and makes you kind of think about the world in a different way. So whoever you're reading, you've just, that's good. You're reading something and you're going to be learning and you're going to be absorbing. But just try and kind of make the effort to kind of record that. But, if it is copywriting books and that kind of stuff, then definitely read me. Glenn Fisher's book, I think is fantastic. I'm really excited to see Glenn Fisher's novel. I think it's going to be really complicated. It's going to be too clever for me, but I'm going to read it anyway and tell him I understood it, because he's a very, very smart guy. But his copywriting book, I think, is up.
He promised me there's a character called Giles in it, but I think he's just playing with me.
I think it's a Giles with a Y, though.
Yeah.
Because that would be just a kick in the nuts, wouldn't it? You almost made it, but then you just got usurped by better Giles.
Awesome. Are there any spy thrillers then, or anything? Because you're not being as contrarian as you think, because we're not asking just solely for industry books. So any books of any shape or size.
I think if you have never read sort of Graham Greene, I'm a Graham Greene sort of fanboy, and I keep going back to sort of Graham Greene like over and over again. Books I've sort of probably read every year for the last 15 years, like The Quiet American and Comedians, End of the Affair. He does like a really remarkable thing with words, and he's we talk about voice in advertising and voice and tone, and he's got such a distinctive voice as an author, and there's such a heavy sense of melancholy throughout all of it, and it's this kind of this kind of poetic sorrow in these really incredible exotic places, and it's always these kind of outsiders, these lonely characters. I think I'm drawn to sort of loneliness in fiction, and I've always considered myself sort of something of a kind of a lone wolf, even though I've got a lovely family and like lots of friends, and I'm in a job where I'm surrounded by people all the time. I feel like a sense of peace when I'm on my own, and I feel like I always need that sort of solitary time. And again, that was one of those things where I thought was sort of very strange and very unusual, and you kind of come to terms and think, well, no, this is a very normal state to kind of be in, and if it makes you happy and it gives you that sort of sense of balance, then no one can say that there's any problem with it. But in Graham Greene, you read that, and you read his stuff, and you feel this sense of the sort of the solitary life and the sort of slightly lonely figures and sort of the beauty in that. So I feel like Graham Greene doesn't need me to tell you how good he is. But if you've never read any and you're a writer and you want to kind of discover more about a real master of the craft, a real master of creating theme and tone and pacing and story and character, I'd urge you to go out and get anything he's written and just start there.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we'll link to Graham Greene's collection of novels. We'll link to Giles with a Y's Read Me, Junior, and Glenn's brilliant The Art of the Click. And so number 4 then is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
I'm going to dedicate this episode to my daughter Penelope, because she is Adele in Adele Writes an Ad. You know, she if I didn't have her running around the house, waking me up in the morning telling me about a dream, and a dream was that me and her flew on a massive seagull to have a picnic on an island made of slush puppies. Her imagination is incredible, and that fills me with joy and hope, and so much love when she sort of tells me these weird and crazy things that pour out of her head. So she is Adele. Without her presence and sort of the way she is and her character, I wouldn't have written that book. And that book is, you know, probably the thing I'm sort of proudest of, I suppose, because it feels like it's sort of telling the story of us, of like our little family, and hopefully that is something kind of Penelope can hold on to, and like other little girls and little boys who are like Penelope, they can hold on to their imagination. So I think it's only fair that seeing as she's not going to get any money from Adele, I'm going to keep all of that. I'm going to buy myself the best soda stream on the market, and she won't see a penny of it. It's only fair that I dedicate this podcast to Penelope.
This episode is very proudly dedicated to Penelope then. Wonderful. So as a final call to action, everyone listening can head over to this episode to find links to everything we've discussed from both Copywriting Ears, Adele, all the recommendations. How else can our listeners get more Andrew Boulton?
I'm on the Twitter machine. I threaten to leave it every day, but I'm still there. Boultini, at Boultini, Boultini. I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me on there. Where else can you find me? I think that's it. I think I don't particularly exist as a human outside of those two social media platforms. But that'll do. That'll be a start. If you need me, you want to chat to me, I always love to hear people who have bought either of the books and have loved them. It's a really, really uplifting and motivating thing to hear. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. If you didn't like them, then fuck you. Don't talk to me about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, mate. We both know I would rather have spoken to Michael Boulton, but it's been a pleasure nonetheless, and a privilege, mate.
Michael Boulton wouldn't have put up with your bullshit for 59 minutes. He's famous. He's really famous.
Yeah, he's great. He had lovely hair. Right, finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. We hugely value your support. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
To action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah, hey, hey.